Bienvenidos a Alimentos y Emociones Podcast. Comer es inevitable. ¿Cómo comer para saciar mi apetito? Es una elección. Soy Claudia Unot. Acompáñame a hablar sobre temas de conducta alimentaria, de la relación emocional que tenemos con los alimentos y cómo satisfacer uno de los impulsos más fundamentales que tenemos en nuestra vida, nuestro apetito. Welcome to you all to Alimentos y Emociones Podcast. It's really nice to have you all back this season. I'm sure that some of you are wondering why on earth I'm speaking in English, but I just really wanted to do something different and start this new series talking about appetite, behavior, and weight. This is a journey that I undertook about nearly 10 years ago now, when I had the opportunity to go and do my PhD at University College London in what was then the behavior, the HBRC, which was the Health, Behavior and Research Center, which belonged to the Epidemiology and Public Health Department at UCL. Now, that department center, which was then so big, was able to turn into a department in its own right, and it is now known as the Behavior Science and Health Department, or Department of Behavior Science and Health, and the research that is conducted in that department is. I'm obviously going to be talking mainly about the area relating to eating behavior and its relationship to weight and other sort of related areas. I just want to say to you that those who have trouble maybe understanding directly the English can go to the YouTube channel. If you're listening to this on whatever podcast channel you prefer, you can actually go to YouTube and to my YouTube channel on Claudia Huno, PhD, and you will be able to see subtitles in Spanish for this recording. That way it makes it easier if some people have a bit of difficulty listening or understanding the English side of things. So please join and listen to in whatever platform you prefer. When I started a year ago with Alimentos y Emociones podcast, my intention was just to sort of start talking about subjects that were dear to my heart, which were mainly, to do with eating behavior, behavior change, appetite, etc. So the first season was a series of like 15 episodes on different techniques or parts of, or, areas to do with eating behavior. So, when to do sort of eating, when to carry out sort of eating behavior techniques, or for example, do it instead of education, or whether to educate people in dietetics terms and nutrition terms, all sorts of subjects in relating to that area. And then my second season was rather long. There's about 30 episodes or a few more on eating behavior during the life course. As you know, I work at the University of Guadalajara at the health center at the University of Guadalajara. I work at a place called the Institute of Human Nutrition, where we work mainly on infant maternal topics. And from that area and in the degree of nutrition, I teach nutrition during the life course. So for me, it was also very important to be able to talk about eating behavior during the life course. Therefore, you can go back and listen to all these episodes. And for those of you who are listening in English, maybe you could go and practice your Spanish. So there's lots of very interesting conversations about eating behavior throughout of the whole life course. So my interest here was to begin with, to open up a conversation which I've been having sort of with myself and luckily with many people, who I've been surrounded by, who I've had the advantage and opportunity to be surrounded by, which have been, which work in the area of appetite and eating behavior and weight. And so I was, and this began, 12 years, nearly 10 years ago in 2012, when I went to do my PhD with Professor Jane Wardle at the HBRC. And so I'm really interested in being able to talk about these conversations and bring up the topic of appetite, behavior, and weight. So the idea of introducing now was just to give you an idea of where it is that I'm going to take these conversations. And I will be having really interesting guests on the program for the next few episodes, where we will be discussing these areas. And maybe it might, you might find it all as interesting, or as it has been for me in my life and in my work and research life as well. So I want to tell you a bit about that. When I first started in this area, I had been working previously on eating disorders mainly, or disordered eating. And I was it was a difficult area clinically, with a lot of pathology which was difficult to handle, and I wanted to change my work area specifically, and I wanted to do a PhD still in the topic of eating behavior. I never knew that what I was going to bump into was not just the world of eating behavior, but obviously of appetite, and obviously of its relationship with weight. So what I did was I came across the child eating behavior questionnaire at that particular point, somewhere around 2010. Which is probably a little bit late, given that it was published in 2001. But anyway, I came across the CBQ and decided that it was interesting. And given that I had this background on eating disorders, and also I worked a lot with adolescents, then why my question was, well, if there was a CBQ and a baby version of it as well, which was the baby eating behavior questionnaire, then why wouldn't there be, for example, a version of the CBQ for adolescents? And, which instead of being parent report questionnaire could be like a self-report questionnaire, and then we could have information about eating behavior. And what I really didn't know then were these appetitive traits, and how we could, in a way, try and explain how children's, or in this case, adolescents' appetite and adolescents' eating behaviors could explain, in many ways in which we eat, relationships to weight, etc. So that took me on a very long journey, which, as I said, I started the PhD, and Professor Jane Wardle said to me, right, well, okay, let's start with, the development of the ABQ for adolescents, but let's also do this for adults. And so we did. So I was able to work on both the adult eating behavior questionnaire and the adult eating behavior questionnaire, which we can also use to collect data on adolescents. Anyway, so this also brought, my attention, obviously, because I had to find out, whether just creating another questionnaire on appetite was the way forward, or the right thing to do. Doing some form of systematic review on all sorts of appetite questionnaires that were available. I had to sort of find a definition as well of appetite with which I could feel comfortable and why I was trying to research this subject. And for example, you might, for me, appetite was a definition that I was able to find from Blundell, which was defined as the process of food selection and intake and its consumption in appropriate amounts in relationship to the maintenance of body weight. So that was the definition that I used for my thesis. No? So we're talking about relationships between hunger and satiety and the psychological experience that determines sort of meal by meal eating behavior. So in this kind of situations, for example, whether you have a state of possibly overweight or obesity or disordered eating, but also, for example, a state of malnourishment or undergrowth or etc. in small kids, you're talking about a deregulation of appetite. And so it was the beginning of a long journey trying to learn about sort of biopsychological aspects of appetite. So my intention here is to be able to start talking about these areas, because I think that I'm a dietitian by trade. And so at least from the sort of dietetics medical area, appetite is seen mainly as hormones. So if you talk about ghrelin and if you talk about leptin, then you're talking about appetite. And I find now that every time that I'm invited to talk about these topics, this is kind of like a new topic in the nutrition world, and it talking about psychological aspects is not really, or biopsychological aspects of appetite is not really where everyone sort of tends to go, not in my world, at least. So as part of this season, I'm really interested in talking about the homeostatic mechanisms of appetite and the hedonic mechanisms as well of appetite and the interplay that exists between them. So hopefully we will be able to discuss with different guests about these topics. And then to be able to touch, or not touch, probably explain more at depth what, appetitive traits are and how, in this field, we actually define them as sort of stable predispositions towards food, and how they fall into these two broad groups of food approach traits and food avoidance traits, which I will be discussing with, again, like I say, with different guests during the length of the season. So talking about, how certain eating behaviors that tend to make us sort of eat more, like enjoying one's food or having sort of greater food responsiveness, or the way we sort of externally, show our response to food, or the way we overeat due to some emotional issue, have obviously these behaviors have been associated with larger appetites and greater interests in food. Whereas when we have, the presence of behaviors which are more of an eating offset type, where, the characteristic would be to avoid food, such as, satiety, responsiveness, such as having, for example, a very low measure, for example, of our sense of satiation, and emotional, for example, undereating, or being very, very slow at eating. All these would be associated with, in many ways, with better appetite control and lower interests in food. And so therefore, These appetitive traits, to me, when I first saw them in the CBQ, I just thought, oh, now this is a really interesting way, because to me, it just, as a dietitian, I have an issue with just making nutrition all about counting calories and helping people to eat by counting calories or just changing their sort of meal plans. I find that quite restrictive and sort of a very annoying as well, because I just find it so sort of small, when actually we're just we're just a lot more complex than that. So to me, this relationship with myself, I've always had a psychological relationship with nutrition anyway. So to me, this actually getting to know yourself more or better and understanding how you relate to food, how you eat, and whether you are a person who eats slower, or whether you're someone who eats faster, or whether you are more of an emotional overeater, or whether you respond to food just by seeing someone else eat or not, is a way of, in fact, actually having certain tools to help, for example, patients on a clinical basis, to show them that, you know, there are other ways in which they can think of food, and maybe applying some of these are like techniques which would help you, for example, slow down your eating, or help you deal sort of with your emotional aspects or side of you, would help you to have a better relationship with food. That's, obviously without touching all the part that relates to food responsiveness or satiety responsiveness, which is more to do with like that part of behavior, which would be the behavioral management, mainly based on cognitive behavioral therapy. But I think that we could actually use now that I've sort of come back from my PhD, I think we could use a whole set of other sort of theories or models for behavior change, which could also be potentially useful. And this not only on a personal basis, but also in the sort of public health area. So I'm sure we'll be, I don't want to spoil it all by talking about it all completely, but I think that hopefully through these interviews, we'll get different perspectives from different researchers, and be able to bring some of these topics, which are just really interesting, given obviously issues with weight. And I don't just want to put it all on an obesity arena, but I do want to say that it is an important area to have to cover on a public health and individual level. So I was very fortunate because Jane Wardle was my PhD supervisor, and unfortunately, while I was doing my PhD, she passed in 2015. I didn't finish until 2016, and then returned to Mexico to carry on with my full-time tenure as I am a professor of nutrition here in Mexico, and do more research. So when I finished, then I had the opportunity to be supervised by Rebecca Beacon and Alison Files and Helen Croker, and hopefully we will have all these guests on this season, and also discuss more matters of appetite, the current research that is being carried out at the moment. So I'm really excited about this season. I hope you will all be watching or listening, like I say, in your favorite podcast. And also that you might want to share these episodes with others who you think would be interested in being able to spread this knowledge and spread this word. I think that in the area of nutrition, this is actually not, it's kind of like a new way of looking at and areas of nutrition. Like I said, it's a lot more psychological. But it makes for a much broader and richer sort of formation, and for a much broader development of the possibilities of where, as dietitians as well, we can be working, and what are different areas or of sort of professional areas could be. So this is not just an invitation. It's obviously an invitation to hear research being carried out in this specific area, but it's also an invitation to think about where these different areas of research can lead everybody to work in a sort of professional and personalized sort of clinical or different areas. So again, my interest is to be able to share these topics, to be able to convey and put together from the horse's mouth, what new areas in the field of appetite, behavior, and weight are being researched currently, from the background that I got to have in 2012, from 2012 to 2016. And now back in the research as well that we're carrying out at the Institute of Human Nutrition over the last 5 years. So I welcome you all, and hopefully, we will all find this interesting. So I hope you will follow us. I hope you will continue to listen. I will be every Tuesday. There will be a new episode for the next, for a good 15 weeks. So that should take us to the end of the year. And I'm going to say, as I say in Spanish, nos seguimos nutriendo. In English would be, we continue to nourish each other. So we shall see you in the next episode. I hope you will follow us. Thank you. Bye. Nos vemos en un próximo episodio de Alimentos y Emociones Podcast. Y recuerda, nos seguimos nutriendo.